Hey guys, tonight we dive headfirst into the weird, restless world of Victorian insomnia. Picture yourself trudging through foggy London streets as the gas lamps flicker. And every creak in your creaky old house threatens to keep you awake all night. You probably won't survive this historical bedtime adventure without a few yawns or the urge to grab a pillow, and maybe rethink your own nightly rituals. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, while you're at it, why not drop your location and local time in the comments? It's a cozy way to connect across centuries and continents. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Insomnia was a proper nemesis back in Victorian England. You might assume it was just poor sleep hygiene or the industrial smog that kept people tossing and turning, but it went deeper than that. The Victorian era was a period loaded with rapid change, technological, social, and medical. And with those changes came a new anxiety about rest itself. Sleep wasn't just a personal luxury, it was a sign of moral and physical health. If you couldn't sleep, it was seen as a kind of failure, a crack in the otherwise orderly Victorian worldview. The whole culture put an enormous amount of pressure on you to pull yourself together and get that elusive 8 hours. No wonder so many people found themselves wide-eyed in bed, staring at the ceiling or counting all the gaslight shadows. You probably wouldn't expect it, but the Victorians actually had a name for sleeplessness: wakefulness or nervous agitation. And it was often linked to the era's famous nervous disorders. People thought that the fast pace of modern life, factories, trains, the bustle of the cities, was causing some kind of nerve exhaustion that made sleep impossible. Historians still argue whether these claims were an early understanding of what we now call anxiety, or simply a cultural scapegoat for the everyday problem of not sleeping well. You can imagine how that only made people more worried, which ironically would keep them awake longer. The problem was compounded by their bedroom conditions. Heating was poor, drafts crept through thick stone walls, and mattresses were often lumpy and filled with straw or horsehair. It's no surprise you might lie awake feeling every creak and chill. And with the advent of gas lighting, brighter than candlelight but harsher on the eyes, the boundary between day and night started to blur, confusing your internal clock. The Victorians were just beginning to realize that light influences sleep, but the science wasn't quite there yet. So they stumbled in the dark, quite literally. What's fascinating is that the Victorian obsession with proper sleep also led to a booming market for sleep aids and remedies, some practical, others utterly bizarre. The fear of sleeplessness was so intense that people were willing to try just about anything, from herbal teas to snail slime, which we'll get to shortly. You can already sense the uphill battle you'd be fighting if you lived back then. Tired yet wired, scared of sleep failure, and bombarded with questionable cures. Meanwhile, doctors were starting to take sleep seriously, studying patterns of rest and dreaming. But the field was in its infancy. The Victorian mindset treated insomnia not just as a medical problem, but as a moral and social one. Getting enough sleep was a symbol of self-discipline and respectability. If you failed at sleep, people might whisper that you were lazy or even morally weak. Quite the pressure cooker for your poor, exhausted brain. In sum, Victorian sleeplessness wasn't just a personal nuisance. It was tangled up in cultural fears, medical confusion, and the very rhythms of a society racing forward. And as you'll soon see, their solutions for getting some shut-eye often involved some truly eyebrow-raising ingredients and rituals. So, let's curl up and prepare for a slow crawl through the strangest bedtime fixes you'd probably never want to try. Now that you're tucked in, eyes heavy but curious, let's wade into the early days of Victorian insomnia remedies. The kind that would make modern sleep gurus cringe and your skin crawl. You're not just facing sleeplessness here, you're facing snail slime and treacle. The sticky, unappetizing concoctions Victorians swore by. Imagine a world where people believed slathering your skin or swallowing thick. Gooey mixtures could lull you into dreamland. You'd probably want to run, but instead, you trudge on with me through this gooey history. The most mainstream remedy of the time was treacle, a syrupy, molasses-like substance made from sugar refining. It wasn't just for sweetening your tea or baking gingerbread. Victorians believed it had medicinal properties, particularly for calming nerves and inducing sleep. People mixed it with warm milk or sometimes even vinegar. The idea was that its sweetness and richness could soothe the digestive system, which they often blamed for restless nights. Now, drinking treacle before bed might sound harmless enough, but the thickness could easily clog your throat if you weren't careful. And the sticky aftertaste likely made falling asleep a bit less peaceful. But wait, there's more. Brace yourself for snail slime. Yes, the same mucousy goo you try to avoid while gardening was once prized as a sleep aid. The Victorians believed that applying snail slime topically could calm the skin and nerves, possibly because it felt cool and soothing. Some even swallowed preparations containing snail extract. Why snail slime? Well, it was part of a wider fascination with natural remedies drawn from the animal kingdom. Sort of an early version of today's obsession with exotic skincare ingredients. Historians still argue whether snail slime had any real pharmacological benefit, or if it was purely placebo and hype fueled by the era's fascination with all things organic. You might also come across plasters or poultices made from strange ingredients, including crushed herbs, honey, and even earthworms. Yes, earthworms. The Victorians were not shy about getting a little slimy or creepy if it meant a better night's sleep. The belief was that these poultices would draw out bad humors or balance the body's fluids, aligning with the prevailing medical theories inherited from ancient times. The sheer variety of these remedies is staggering. People literally rubbed, drank, and inhaled anything that promised a break from insomnia. A curious tidbit is the use of warm brandy or whiskey mixed with treacle or honey. Alcohol was commonly thought to induce sleep, though it often did the opposite, disrupting deeper sleep stages. The Victorian endorsement of spirits as a sleep aid is a perfect example of how their remedies sometimes backfired. Today, you'd probably reach for chamomile tea or a meditation app, but they reached for the bottle, sometimes with disastrous consequences, as you can imagine. These remedies were far from standardized. Everyone had their own recipe, and what worked for one person might have done nothing for another. Yet, this trial-and-error approach fueled a booming cottage industry of homemade potions, balms, and poultices, passed down through families or sold in local apothecaries. The allure of a guaranteed sleep fix was irresistible, despite the dubious ingredients. The patchwork of Victorian insomnia cures also included the quirky belief that certain colors or textures affected your nervous system. For example, some recommended scratching or rubbing skin with soft fabric soaked in these concoctions to relax muscles. It sounds a bit like a spa day gone wrong. But back then, this tactile engagement was seen as a therapeutic ritual, something to take your mind off worry and physically prepare your body for rest. Sleep scientists today would probably roll their eyes at most of these remedies. But remember that in an era before effective pharmaceuticals or deep neurological understanding, people reached for whatever they thought might work. And while the sticky, snail-slimy side of Victorian insomnia cures feels gross to us, it's a vivid reminder of how desperate people were to find relief from their endless nights. So as you lie there, maybe a bit squirmy at the thought of snail slime on your skin, take comfort in knowing that the Victorians were just as desperate for rest as you are. They just had much stranger ideas about how to get it. You're starting to feel the weight of Victorian sleeplessness pressing down. And now it's time to step into the bustling, sometimes chaotic world of patent medicines. Imagine wandering into a pharmacy with shelves lined from floor to ceiling with mysterious bottles and dubious promises, each claiming to be your golden ticket to sleep. Welcome to the quackery's golden age, where miracle sleep potions were the hottest sellers, and safe was a flexible concept, often ignored altogether. Patent medicines were basically the Wild West of the pharmaceutical world. These concoctions came in colorful bottles, plastered with fancy labels boasting guaranteed relief or cures insomnia instantly. But what you wouldn't see, because it wasn't legally required then, was the actual list of ingredients. Some were innocent herbal extracts, but many contained addictive substances like opium, morphine, or even cocaine. Yep, you heard that right. Victorian apothecaries and patent medicine companies didn't just skirt regulation. They practically invented the idea of selling you a sleep fix that might land you in a worse place. One particularly popular patent medicine was Dr. Radway's Ready Relief, which promised to soothe nerves and induce sleep. It contained opiates. And while it worked, because opiates do knock you out, the addictive potential was sky high. People often didn't realize they were slowly trading one problem for another. Historians still argue whether the widespread acceptance of these medicines was a result of genuine ignorance or a societal willingness to embrace quick fixes despite known risks. Adding to the chaos was the aggressive advertising culture. Newspapers and posters were plastered with testimonials that ranged from wildly enthusiastic to downright suspicious. "I slept for 12 hours straight," claimed one ad, conveniently ignoring the fact that too much opium can cause coma-like states. The idea that a magic potion could solve your sleep troubles was irresistible, especially when your doctor's advice was vague or non-existent. Interestingly, some patent medicines incorporated ingredients now recognized for mild sedative effects, like valerian root or hops. But their potency was often overshadowed by the more dangerous chemicals sneaking in. This blurred the line between herbal remedy and hard drug, confusing consumers and doctors alike. It's like ordering chamomile tea and getting something more like a sleeping pill from the dark side. Even the term patent was misleading. Most of these remedies weren't patented inventions at all, but rather secret formulas kept closely guarded to avoid regulation. That air of mystery made them seem even more special and potent. Some sellers went so far as to offer personalized sleep elixirs, tweaking their recipes based on a customer's age, gender, or nervous temperament. It was early targeted marketing, Victorian style. On the fringe, some of these medicines contained truly odd ingredients: strychnine, belladonna, or even mercury compounds. While today these sound like poison, Victorians operated under a very different set of medical beliefs, where such substances were thought to balance the body or cleanse the nerves. You probably wouldn't survive a night with these potions in your system, as you're drifting between sleep and wakefulness. It's worth remembering how this mix of hope, desperation, and dangerous substances created a sleep aid culture that's both fascinating and frightening. People craved rest so badly, they overlooked risks that would make modern health experts shudder. And the legacy, many of today's regulations and warnings around sleep medications grew from the Victorian patent medicine chaos. So, next time you find yourself scrolling past dubious wellness ads, think back to those gaslit pharmacy shelves, where every bottle promised sleep but often delivered something much darker. As you settle deeper into this Victorian sleep saga, it's time to face the dark heart of many insomnia remedies: opium. The Victorian era had a complex, often cozy relationship with this powerful drug, which found its way into countless sleep aids. And it wasn't just confined to shady back-alley sales. Opium was mainstream medicine, prescribed by doctors, sold in pharmacies, and even recommended in the family home. It was the go-to solution for restless nights. But beneath the calm, it promised lurked dangers that few fully understood. Imagine a Victorian household where a mother doses her child with laudanum, a tincture made from opium dissolved in alcohol, to soothe their nerves and coax sleep. It was common practice. The drug's sedative effects made it irresistible to those desperate to escape insomnia's grip. But here's the catch. Opium was highly addictive and could easily lead to dependency or overdose. People sometimes mistook their worsening condition for a need for more of the drug, sinking deeper into a foggy haze rather than waking refreshed. Victorian doctors embraced opium as a versatile panacea, not only for sleeplessness, but also for pain, coughs, and even diarrhea. Its use was widespread enough that some historians argue it created an early opioid crisis, though it was largely hidden behind social norms and medical endorsements. Families didn't often talk openly about addiction, and the line between therapeutic use and misuse was blurry at best. You might think that someone would have shouted, "Hold on, this is dangerous." But the science of addiction was in its infancy, and the cultural acceptance of opium dulled that alarm. One quirky aspect was that laudanum came in various strengths, and sometimes people made their own homemade versions with unknown potencies. Measuring the right dose was guesswork, a gamble that could have deadly consequences. There are stories of accidental overdoses or chronic users slipping into long-term dependency, sometimes without even realizing it. Historians still argue whether Victorian society truly understood addiction or simply turned a blind eye to a widespread problem. The social perception of opium was also fascinating. On the one hand, it was medically respectable, used by doctors and even praised in literature as a dream-inducing wonder. On the other, its recreational use among artists and writers, think Samuel Taylor Coleridge and his opium-inspired poems, added a layer of mystique and taboo. The blurred boundaries between medicine, art, and addiction created a complex cultural web around the drug. Opium's influence wasn't just medical, but architectural. 2. Some Victorian homes had opium dens hidden in plain sight, private rooms or corners where the drug was consumed for both sleep and escape. These weren't the exotic dens of the East, as often imagined, but rather quiet domestic spaces, giving a very different flavor to the idea of Victorian nights. So, as you lie back, imagining the heavy, smoky atmosphere of a Victorian parlor where laudanum bottles lined the shelves, remember that this sleep drug was both a blessing and a curse. It promised peaceful nights, but sometimes trapped users in a foggy twilight from which waking was almost impossible. That's the paradox of Victorian sleep. A deep yearning for rest, paired with remedies that could steal it away forever. And as you drift closer to sleep, remember this dark embrace behind those silky dreams. You're sinking deeper into the Victorian night, where the battle against insomnia was fought not just with potions, but with rituals. elaborate, sometimes comforting, often superstitious bedtime routines that mixed practicality with a dash of old-world charm. Imagine yourself preparing for sleep as a Victorian would. A series of careful steps designed to coax the body and mind gently toward rest. The process wasn't quick. It was almost ceremonious, as if sleep itself required a bit of persuasion. First comes the warm bath, an essential Victorian prelude to sleep. You trudge into your chilly bathroom, the air thick with steam and the faint scent of lavender or rosewater, scents carefully chosen for their calming effects. Bathing wasn't just for hygiene, but a way to relax tense muscles and soothe frayed nerves. The warm water's embrace would slowly lower your body temperature afterward, triggering your body's natural sleep signals. While that might sound familiar to modern sleep advice, Victorians layered their baths with herbs or oils believed to cleanse bad spirits or nervous agitation, blending health and superstition in a single soak. Next, the bedroom itself demanded attention. Heavy velvet curtains would be drawn tightly to block out drafts and noisy city lights. You'd pull on woolen slippers and slip under layers of flannel or cotton sheets, each added layer promising insulation from the cold that crept through those stone walls. Bed-warming pans filled with hot coals were often placed beneath the blankets to stave off the chill, a practical comfort that also carried a tiny risk of burns or smoke inhalation. Historians still argue whether the Victorian obsession with warmth in bed was purely comfort-driven or also linked to ideas about preserving vital humors through heat. Lighting played a critical role in this routine. Gas lamps with dimming controls allowed for the softest glow before bedtime, creating an atmosphere that was both calming and slightly mysterious. You might have a candle or two burning nearby, but the flickering flames also raised concerns about fire hazards. So there was a constant tension between comfort and safety. This delicate dance with light was an early form of what we now call sleep hygiene, though the Victorians added their own theatrical flair. A curious quirk of these routines was the inclusion of nervous exercises, gentle hand massages, light stretching, or slow breathing patterns taught in some health manuals. These were believed to steady the pulse and quiet the mind, almost like a Victorian version of modern mindfulness or yoga. Some enthusiasts would even listen to soft music or the sound of rain recorded on phonograph cylinders, a luxury few could afford but coveted for its soporific effect. Of course, these rituals weren't just about physical comfort. They also carried a moral undertone. A well-executed bedtime routine was a sign of discipline and respectability, marking you as someone who took care of their health and adhered to societal expectations. Failing to maintain these habits could be interpreted as sloth or poor character. Pretty heavy stuff for just trying to get a good night's sleep. While some routines were genuinely helpful, others veered into the odd. For instance, some recommended wearing tight headbands or even wrapping the head in bandages to steady the nerves. These uncomfortable practices sound like they would do the exact opposite of helping you sleep. But the Victorians believed in the power of physical containment to calm mental chaos. Historians still debate how widespread and effective these bizarre treatments really were, but they add a memorable layer to the bedtime picture. So, as you feel the warmth of your blankets and the dim glow of a bedside lamp, imagine the layers of Victorian intention wrapped around each act of getting ready for bed. It was a delicate blend of science, superstition, and social expectation, a nightly performance designed to defeat the lurking enemy of insomnia. And if your own bedtime routine feels a little too complicated sometimes, just remember, it could always involve hot coals in the sheets and headbands tight enough to double as medieval armor. The night deepens, and you slip further into the Victorian quest for sleep, where the mind itself became a battlefield. Among the era's most intriguing attempts to conquer insomnia was a fascination with hypnotism and mesmerism, mind tricks promising to lull restless souls into calm slumber. You probably picture these as strange sideshows, but they were taken seriously by many. With a mix of genuine belief, hopeful desperation, and a sprinkle of showmanship. Mesmerism, named after Franz Mesmer, a late 18th century figure who claimed to manipulate an invisible animal magnetism, fascinated Victorians because it suggested that sleep could be induced through mental suggestion and energy transfer. Practitioners believed they could direct this magnetic force to relax the nervous system, quiet the mind, and send patients gently into sleep. You might imagine a Victorian sitting cross-legged, eyes glazed, while someone waved a pendulum or softly spoke commands. The room thick with expectation and maybe a hint of lavender. The allure was simple. If sleeplessness was caused by an overstimulated or unbalanced nervous system, then perhaps the solution was to reset it mentally. Hypnotism promised a shortcut to relaxation, bypassing physical discomfort with a direct mind-to-body switch. Victorian doctors, spiritualists, and even stage performers all dabbled in hypnotism, blurring the lines between science and entertainment. Yet, skeptics abounded. Some accused mesmerists of being charlatans, preying on the vulnerable, while others questioned whether the sleep achieved was genuine or simply a trance-like state without real rest. Historians still argue whether hypnotism truly provided meaningful relief from insomnia, or if its benefits were largely psychological. A placebo effect fueled by expectation and belief. Interestingly, the Victorian obsession with mesmerism fed into broader ideas about the unconscious mind and the power of suggestion, concepts that would influence psychology for decades. You could say they were stumbling into early cognitive therapy, though with a lot more mysticism. Some even claimed that mesmerism could cure ailments beyond sleeplessness, from hysteria to chronic pain, turning bedrooms and parlors into experimental theaters of healing. One quirky fact is that mesmerism sometimes involved elaborate props, magnetic rings, glowing crystals, or intricate hand gestures designed to channel energy. You'd probably find it more amusing than relaxing today. But back then, the spectacle added to the therapeutic aura. The dim gaslight and soft voice combined with ritualistic motions made the experience immersive, almost a Victorian version of ASMR before ASMR was a thing, despite its flaws and controversies. Hypnotism's legacy in sleep treatment is significant. It introduced the idea that mental states could directly influence sleep quality, a concept now central to cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, CBTI. So, while you might chuckle at Victorian mesmerists waving hands over someone's forehead, you're also looking at an early ancestor of modern sleep psychology. As your mind drifts toward dreams, consider the Victorian willingness to experiment with the intangible, the mysterious magnetic forces of the mind, as a testament to their desperate search for rest. Even if the pendulum swings didn't always land softly, they nudged open new doors in understanding how the mind and body connect in the dance of sleep. The night's shadows lengthened slowly, drawing curtains of darkness over cobblestone streets and shuttered windows. But within these quiet streets, a restless war was fought nightly, one between the luminous glow of progress and the ancient need for restful darkness. You feel yourself sinking deeper into this Victorian struggle for sleep, a time when light was both an ally and an enemy. The Victorians lived on the cusp of an illuminated revolution. Gas lamps had transformed city nights. their steady flames burning brighter and longer than the flickering candlelight that had come before. These lamps hung from wrought iron posts along the streets, illuminated public squares, and glowed softly within homes. Yet, this newfound brightness came with a cost. The very light that promised comfort and safety also threatened the delicate balance of the body's internal rhythms, leaving many wide-eyed long after midnight's embrace. Imagine a typical Victorian bedroom, a sanctuary painstakingly prepared for night's arrival. Heavy velvet curtains, dyed deep indigo or russet, were drawn tightly to seal out not just the noisy street, but the relentless glow of gas lamps beyond. These curtains were thick, layered, sometimes lined with additional fabric to create a near impenetrable barrier against stray light. The walls were draped with tapestries and wallpapers in muted saffron and teal hues, designed to soften shadows and insulate against cold. Woolen slippers rested beside beds, swathed in layers of flannel and cotton sheets, promising warmth through the chill creeping beneath the stone walls. Within these rooms, gas lamps were suspended from ceiling fixtures or placed on ornate stands of brass and iron. Unlike the flickering, unreliable flame of candles, these lamps could be adjusted, though the science of dimming was imprecise. Some Victorians fiercely debated the right level of light to permit before bedtime. Many insisted that even the faintest glow could overexcite the eyes and nerves, disrupting the fragile descent into slumber. This obsession with mastering light's power did not stop at windows and curtains. Some homes featured shutters and blinds engineered with surprising sophistication to seal out unwelcome illumination. Doors were carefully fitted, and heavy rugs muffled sounds and softened the intrusion of light. It was an early, rudimentary understanding of how darkness signaled the body to release melatonin, the hormone coaxing sleep from weary minds and bodies. Yet, the bright gas lamps brought their own complications. The burning gas released smoke and fumes into tightly packed city streets, creating invisible pollution that added an insidious layer of stress to Victorian lives. The constant threat of fire from these new lamps also contributed to a pervasive unease. This modern illumination, designed to banish fear, sometimes did the opposite, churning anxieties beneath the surface and worsening insomnia. Among the more curious remedies tied to this fascination with light was the so-called light diet, recommended by some physicians. This practice advised avoiding bright lights during evening hours, a notion that surprisingly parallels modern sleep hygiene. However, it was combined with peculiar rituals. Some Victorians would stare through colored glass panes, believing that specific hues, red, blue, green, possessed distinct powers to calm nerves or induce sleep. These beliefs were often supported by anecdote rather than evidence, and historians debate whether colored light therapy was widely practiced or remained a niche curiosity among the more eccentric. In contrast to bright illumination, another Victorian innovation was the use of night lights, lamps set to the lowest possible brightness, meant to provide comfort without disturbing the fragile threshold between wakefulness and sleep. These proto-night lights were a gentle glow for those terrified of total darkness or haunted by superstitions about nocturnal spirits. Ghosts, demons, and restless souls were thought to lurk in shadows, so the presence of even a faint light could ward off nightmares and unwanted visitors alike. The struggle with light extended far beyond bedroom walls. The rapid spread of gas street lamps across London and other cities created a new problem: relentless outside illumination, even with blackout curtains drawn tightly. The ambient glow seeped in, an early form of what we now call light pollution. The Victorians were among the first to confront this phenomenon, lamenting how city lights blurred the natural night-day boundary and disturbed sleep. This conflict between light and dark was more than a battle of bulbs and curtains. It was a fight to reclaim the night itself, a primal need obscured beneath layers of industrial progress and cultural change. As the night deepens and your eyelids flutter in the quiet gloom, you find yourself transported to a different time, an era when the mysteries of sleep were just beginning to unfurl under the flickering glow of candlelight and gas lamps. The Victorian Age, with all its scientific fervor and cultural contradictions, marked the nascent world of sleep science. A time when doctors and thinkers sat amid stacks of leather-bound journals and quill-stained papers, painstakingly observing the restless minds and bodies of their patients. Imagine yourself in a Victorian study, its walls lined with dark wooden shelves bowed under the weight of medical tomes, the air heavy with the mingled scents of beeswax, leather, and faintly herbal medicines. A large oak desk dominates the room, scattered with notes, sketches, and early photographs capturing the faces of those troubled by sleepless nights. A small brass oil lamp flickers, casting elongated shadows that dance upon diagrams of the human brain, simple, yet filled with enigmatic complexity. Here, the first pioneers of sleep medicine began to glimpse that sleep was no mere passive rest, but a dynamic physiological process. Unlike previous generations, who considered sleep simply as an absence of wakefulness or a brief suspension of life's activities, Victorian researchers sought to categorize the stages of sleep, observing patients. They noticed distinctions, periods of quiet sleep, when the body lay still and breath even, and intervals of dreamy or restless sleep, where eyes darted beneath lids and limbs twitched with unseen activity, although they lacked tools like the EEG, which would come a century later. Their insights planted the seeds for the modern understanding of sleep architecture. Among these early discoveries was a growing recognition of sleep disorders. The term narcolepsy, coined in the late 19th century, marked the burgeoning awareness that sleep could be not only elusive, but also dangerously uncontrollable. Victorian doctors began documenting symptoms such as sudden sleep attacks, persistent insomnia, and other ailments that disrupted the night's rest. These were often linked to nervous system disorders, a concept fitting neatly with the Victorian medical worldview that centered on nervous energy as the foundation of health and illness alike. One of the era's most curious fascinations lay in the mysterious phenomena occurring just before sleep: the hypnagogic hallucinations. Those fleeting images, sounds, and sensations experienced as the mind teeters on the edge of consciousness captivated Victorian minds. Were these the mind's first glimpses into the dream world? Or perhaps signs of spiritual communication? Many Victorian manuals offered advice on how to control these pre-sleep visions. Some recommended herbal tinctures, mixtures of valerian, hops, or even opium derivatives, to soothe the nervous system and prevent unsettling hallucinations. Others emphasized the power of will, urging patients to fix their gaze or meditate on calming images to shape the incoming visions. These manuals often straddled the boundary between scientific observation and superstition, reflecting the era's ongoing tension between reason and mysticism. Historians today debate how seriously these early sleep researchers took these phenomena. Were they earnest inquiries into the workings of the mind, or cultural artifacts reflecting contemporary anxieties and spiritual beliefs? In truth, the answer lies somewhere in the middle. Victorian sleep science was as much about morality and social order as it was about physiology. Sleeplessness was not just a medical issue. It was a mark on one's character and constitution. To suffer from poor sleep could imply weakness or moral failing, complicating both diagnosis and treatment. Dream interpretation thrived during this period as a complementary practice. Many Victorians kept dream journals, believing that their nocturnal visions contained messages from the unconscious or even divine warnings. These journals often combined folk beliefs with emerging psychological theories, creating a rich tapestry of symbolic imagery. Nightmares, in particular, were seen as portentous. Some blamed them on external malevolent forces, evil spirits, witches, or restless ghosts, and advocated for prayers, charms, or protective amulets as remedies. Others believed poor ventilation and unhealthy living conditions allowed harmful vapors to infiltrate the mind during sleep. This intersection of old superstition and new scientific curiosity made Victorian sleep study an odd and fascinating blend. The dreamer's social standing also influenced interpretations. For the wealthy and educated, dreams might be analyzed for their poetic or philosophical content. For the working class, nightmares and restless nights often signaled physical hardship or moral shortcomings. The lines between health, spirituality, and social expectation blurred, and Victorian physicians had to navigate these complex currents with care. As you drift closer to your own dreams, consider these early thinkers peering into the dark frontier of the sleeping mind. Though their instruments were crude, their curiosity profound, their theories a patchwork of observation and speculation, yet always driven by a desire to understand the mysterious processes that unfold when the eyes close and consciousness fades. Their work laid the groundwork for today's sleep medicine. The notion that sleep involves distinct stages, that disorders have neurological bases, and that mental state influences rest, all began here. The Victorian era was a crucible of discovery, mixing the harsh light of science with the lingering shadows of superstition. Tonight, as your own mind floats between wakefulness and sleep, remember the centuries of human fascination and struggle that led to this moment. Your restless thoughts echo a timeless quest, a quest to unravel the mysteries of the night, to find peace within the darkness, and to understand the silent symphony played by your own brain as it dances on the edge of dreams. The night wraps around you like a soft blanket, the kind that muffles sound and blurs the edges of thought, inviting a gentle surrender to sleep. But for Victorians, this surrender was anything but simple. The struggle for peaceful slumber was woven deeply into their senses, especially the sense of smell, which played a surprisingly pivotal role in their nightly rituals. Long before the rise of modern aromatherapy, Victorian parlors and bedchambers were steeped in fragrant traditions. Lavender and other dried herbs scented the air, offering a promise of calm and restfulness, a sensory lullaby to weary minds. Among the myriad scents of Victorian life, lavender reigned supreme as the undisputed queen of sleep-inducing fragrances, known even then for its soothing properties. Lavender was believed to gently calm the nerves, ease anxiety, and usher the restless soul toward the shores of sleep. It was common to find lavender tucked into small cloth sachets, neatly placed beneath pillows, or housed in delicate porcelain pots standing sentinel near bedsides. The faint, floral aroma would waft softly, a subtle sedative permeating the heavy night air. Victorians attributed more than mere comfort to lavender's scent. It was thought to possess mild antiseptic properties, a natural purifier of indoor air that could drive away miasmas, noxious vapors believed to be the invisible culprits behind illness and sleepless nights. The word miasma itself carried a sinister weight in Victorian medicine. Bad smells were more than unpleasant. They were harbingers of disease. The fragrant purple buds of lavender, then, were a weapon in the fight against both physical and spiritual malaise. Modern science has since validated many of these beliefs. Studies demonstrate that lavender oil can indeed have a calming effect on the nervous system, reducing heart rate and blood pressure, and improving subjective sleep quality. It seems that the Victorians, in their blending of herbal lore and early pharmacology, stumbled upon a natural ally for sleeplessness, for some. These purple-scented sachets were not just comforting props, but effective tools in their nightly quest for rest. Lavender's reign did not preclude the use of other fragrant allies. Victorian nights were scented with a bouquet of herbs, each chosen for their supposed therapeutic qualities. Rosemary, with its sharp, invigorating aroma, was believed to refresh the mind and body, clearing away the fatigue that so often clung to day's end. Chamomile, well known for its calming properties, was another favorite, often brewed into teas or placed dried in pillows to coax relaxation. Hops, famously used in beer brewing, found a quieter, more intimate role in Victorian sleep rituals, known for their mild sedative effects. Hops were stuffed into pillows, or pillows were sprinkled with hops-infused sprays. The resulting fragrance was earthy, slightly bitter, and deeply soothing, providing a gentle nudge toward slumber. The more adventurous Victorians burned incense made from crushed herbs or essential oils, filling the bedroom with thick, sleep-friendly smoke. These incense sticks or powders created a sensory cocoon, layering scent with shadow and warmth. The ritual of lighting incense, watching the smoke curl upward, and breathing in the complex aromas was as much a psychological balm as a physical one. The belief was that these scents could balance the body's humors, the ancient idea of bodily fluids whose equilibrium dictated health, and calm an overstimulated nervous system ravaged by the stresses of Victorian life. Historians still debate whether these aromatic practices were rooted in genuine pharmacological effects or were primarily poetic superstitions. Perhaps they were both, an elegant mingling of empirical herbal knowledge and cultural tradition. Either way, the rituals around scent created a sensory environment uniquely conducive to relaxation, a small sanctuary from the turmoil of the waking world. Among the most curious and luxurious sleep aids of the Victorian era was ambergris, a rare and bizarre substance derived from the digestive system of sperm whales. Ambergris was prized in perfumery for its unique scent, a rich, earthy, and slightly marine aroma that could enhance and fix other fragrances. But beyond its role in fine perfumes, it found its way into sleep potions and nighttime perfumes. To imagine ambergris as a sleep aid today is to confront Victorian eccentricity at its most extravagant. This whale-born material was more than a scent. It was a symbol of wealth, refinement, and sophistication. To dab a few drops of ambergris essence onto a handkerchief or into a pillow spray was to wrap oneself in a fragrant cloak of luxury, even as the origins of the substance, often poetically described as whale vomit, might prompt less glamorous thoughts. The use of ambergris in sleep rituals highlights the sometimes contradictory nature of Victorian tastes. While many sought simple herbal remedies, others embraced exotic, costly ingredients as markers of social status. One might well imagine a Victorian lady dozing off in silks and lace, the air around her tinged with the mysterious scent of the deep ocean's secret gift. While most scents aim to lull the sleeper into gentle oblivion, an intriguing and lesser-known practice involved what could be called negative aromatherapy, the deliberate use of pungent, sharp odors to shock the nerves awake or clear a foggy mind before attempting sleep again. This practice was particularly common among those who experienced fitful, fragmented sleep, waking repeatedly in confusion and agitation. Certain herbs and spices, cloves, rosemary, even vinegar, were employed as olfactory wake-up calls. A sharp whiff was believed to recalibrate the nervous system, jolting the sleeper back into clarity or providing a mental reset for another attempt at rest. This seemingly paradoxical approach reveals the Victorians' nuanced understanding of the relationship between the senses and the mind. Recognizing that smell could both soothe and stimulate depending on circumstance. Victorian aromatherapy was never purely medicinal. It was deeply ritualistic. The act of preparing a sachet of herbs, lighting an incense stick, or arranging pots of flowers was a nightly ceremony, an exercise in control and comfort amid the uncertainties of life and health. For many Victorians, these scent rituals were moments of calm in chaotic lives, gestures that bridged the gap between science and superstition, body and spirit, in a world shadowed by disease, industrial change, and social upheaval. The simple act of breathing in calming aromas was a small but potent claim to peace. Today, as we spritz lavender oil before bed or diffuse chamomile scents in our rooms, we participate in a tradition centuries old. The Victorians may have wrapped their remedies in layers of mystery and ritual, but their quest was fundamentally human: to find rest, solace, and a momentary escape from the restless pace of the waking world. Now, as you sink ever deeper into the fabric of Victorian bedtime, it's time to examine the very bed beneath you, the silent stage upon which all the nightly drama of insomnia, restlessness, and uneasy sleep played out. The Victorian bed was far more than a simple platform to rest one's weary body. It was an evolving instrument of comfort, a declaration of social status, and sometimes a source of anxiety and unrest. To truly understand Victorian sleep, one must first understand the bed itself, the layered, complex sanctuary that promised warmth, security, and rest, yet often delivered discomfort, suspicion, and sleepless nights. Picture yourself, if you will, slipping into a Victorian bed, a stark contrast to the plush memory foam and spring mattresses we so casually sink into today. This bed, constructed of various natural materials, was a carefully arranged concoction of feathers, coarse horsehair, and stiff cotton stuffing, all nestled beneath thick, heavy linens, blankets, and quilts. These layers were essential, designed to protect sleepers from the penetrating chill of drafty homes, unheated rooms, and the pervasive cold of Victorian winters. Yet, paradoxically, these very blankets and mattresses, meant to shield and soothe, sometimes proved to be the very elements that kept sleepers awake. The weight and texture of the bedding could provoke discomfort or cause overheating. The thickness sometimes stifled ventilation, while the materials often concealed irritants that agitated sensitive sleepers. At the pinnacle of Victorian bedding luxury was the feather bed, considered the ultimate indulgence. Feather beds were prized for their softness, warmth, and the gentle way they yielded beneath the body's weight. Filled with down feathers, primarily from geese or ducks, these beds were the epitome of nighttime comfort, favored by the wealthy and those with refined taste. Their plushness created a cloud-like surface that promised not only warmth, but a sense of weightless ease. The gentle rustling of feathers under the sheets and the enveloping softness were celebrated as a balm for the nerves and a means to invite peaceful sleep. Yet this luxurious comfort was not without its costs. Feather beds were incredibly heavy, cumbersome to manage, and notoriously difficult to clean. Victorian homes, lacking modern vacuum cleaners and dust mite treatments, were fertile grounds for allergens. These feather beds could easily harbor dust mites, insects, and other microscopic creatures, Victorian equivalents of modern allergens, that might provoke coughing, wheezing, or restless nights, particularly in those with respiratory sensitivities. The feather bed was thus a double-edged sword, a sanctuary for some, a nightmare for others. This hidden menace lurked beneath the layers of softness, a silent saboteur of rest. For the less affluent, the bedding situation was far less comfortable. The middle classes and the working poor commonly relied on horsehair mattresses, a stark contrast to the plush feather beds of the upper classes. These mattresses were stuffed with densely packed strands of horsehair, known for their firmness and resilience, unlike the yielding softness of feathers. Horsehair mattresses were stiff, often lumpy and unforgiving, offering minimal cushioning and warmth. However, horsehair was prized for its supposed health benefits. It was believed to support proper spinal alignment and encourage healthy circulation during sleep. These beliefs were rooted in contemporary medical theories that emphasized the maintenance of bodily humors and the balance of the nervous system. Horsehair, in the Victorian imagination, was almost medicinal, an agent of bodily order amidst the chaos of daily life. Even more rustic was the straw mattress, common in the poorest households, filled with bundles of dried straw or hay. These mattresses were rough, uneven, and offered scant comfort. Yet, they carried their own mystical associations. Some Victorians subscribed to the idea that sleeping close to the earth connected the body to natural energies, or earth humors, that help balance the constitution. The straw mattress was seen as a conduit for these beneficial forces, grounding the sleeper and harmonizing the body's internal rhythms. This belief wove together Victorian scientific curiosity with older folk traditions, a reminder of how deeply superstition and medicine were intertwined in daily life. The Victorian relationship with bedding extended beyond comfort to encompass health and morality. Some medical practitioners warned that synthetic or overly soft materials might weaken the nerves, contributing to nervous disorders and insomnia. This was no mere commercial hyperbole. It was a genuine concern in an age when nerves were seen as the seat of health and disease. A mattress that was too yielding might cause the vital humors to stagnate, weakening the sleeper's constitution and exacerbating sleeplessness. Horsehair mattresses were therefore marketed with claims that they aligned humors and strengthened the backbone, lending an almost therapeutic aura to the act of lying down. This peculiar blend of health advice and marketing rhetoric provided a uniquely Victorian perspective on bedding, where mattresses were more than functional objects. They were instruments of bodily governance and moral rectitude. Equally significant was the bed frame itself. From simple wooden platforms of previous centuries, Victorian beds evolved into magnificent four-poster affairs. These four-poster beds were architectural marvels of the bedroom, tall and imposing, often carved from dark hardwood and festooned with heavy curtains of velvet, brocade, or damask. The curtains were not merely ornamental. They served the practical purpose of creating a sealed, warm enclosure that could block out drafts and street noise. Drawing the curtains around the bed formed a private cocoon, a sanctuary from the household's hustle and bustle and the chill air of unheated rooms. This enclosure offered physical warmth, but also psychological comfort, a private refuge in a world that could often be harsh and unforgiving. Yet this very cocooning could be a double-edged sword. The heavy curtains, while trapping heat, also restricted airflow, leading to stale, stuffy air around the sleeper. Victorian physicians often expressed concerns that inadequate ventilation within these bed curtains might contribute to night sweats and restless sleep. Some believed that poor air circulation exacerbated nervous disorders and disturbed sleep patterns. Opening windows to improve ventilation was an option, but one fraught with risk. Cold drafts could chill the body, while open windows invited noise, insects, and even wandering spirits, ideas that were far from fanciful in the Victorian imagination. These practical and medical considerations were wrapped in a dense layer of social symbolism. The Victorian bed was one of the most important indicators of wealth and status. To have a richly decorated four-poster bed with elaborate curtains, fine linens, and multiple layers of quilts and coverlets was a mark of social standing and domestic pride. Visitors glimpsing a well-appointed bedroom could glean much about the occupant's place in society. The bed was a centerpiece of the chamber's decor, commanding attention and respect. Even the act of preparing the bed, pulling back layers to reveal pristine linens, became a ritual performance, a sign of proper housekeeping and family honor. Layer upon layer of quilts, coverlets, bedspreads, and heavy blankets not only kept cold at bay, but also created a visually impressive tableau. Each layer was often embroidered, tasseled, or patterned, a testament to the household's taste and resources. Textile production had flourished in Victorian Britain, and fine fabrics were readily available to the middle and upper classes. The bedding was thus both functional and ornamental, a melding of comfort and conspicuous consumption. Yet even in modest homes, the bed was often the most carefully adorned piece of furniture, invested with symbolic and practical importance. Beyond the physical and social dimensions, the Victorian bed was also enmeshed in spiritual and supernatural beliefs. Many Victorians harbored fears that the bed could become a vessel for bad spirits, restless energies, or malevolent influences that disturbed sleep and brought nightmares or illness. To counteract these unseen threats, it was common practice to place charms or protective objects beneath the mattress. A silver penny was especially popular, thought to possess magical properties capable of warding off evil. Some families tucked dried herbs, rue, wormwood, vervain under the sheets, believed to protect sleepers from nocturnal harm. These customs reveal how sleep was understood as a vulnerable, liminal state, fraught with potential dangers beyond mere physical discomfort. The bed was not just a piece of furniture, but a spiritual battleground where good and evil forces contended. The ritual placement of charms and coins was a form of folk medicine, a blending of superstition and faith that aimed to safeguard the sleeper's body and soul. The faint glint of a silver penny beneath one's head was a small but potent talisman against the terrors of the night. In this light, the Victorian bed emerges as an intensely symbolic object, part mattress, part fortress, part talisman, crucial in the eternal human struggle against insomnia and the restless night. The battles fought upon it were physical, social, medical, and spiritual. Each restless toss or wakeful hour was a testament to this complex interplay. Today, as you lay upon your modern mattress, be it memory foam, latex, or spring, cradled in breathable cotton and synthetic blends, with temperature controls, cheese, and allergen barriers, it is worth pausing to reflect on this rich history. Your bed, with all its comforts, is the heir to centuries of innovation, superstition, and social meaning. It is a far cry from the dense layers of feathers and horsehair, the heavy velvet curtains, and the protective pennies that once guarded Victorian sleepers. If you sometimes struggle with your own rest, take solace that your nightly battleground no longer includes curtains so heavy they trap you all night, nor mattresses so lumpy they threaten your posture, nor bedding that harbors hidden mites and unseen spirits. Your fight for sleep is part of a long lineage, a story woven through history where comfort, fear, health, and status were all interlaced upon the simple, yet profound, act of lying down to sleep. You're now cradled by the weight of Victorian nights, a time when the battle against insomnia was fierce and unyielding. And the restless mind sought relief not only in potions and prayers, but also in curious contraptions designed to coax the weary body into slumber. It's time to meet some of the strange, often bewildering inventions Victorian inventors and physicians conjured in their quest to master sleep. These devices, though promising repose, often resembled instruments of medieval torture more than aids to gentle rest. From reclined sleep chairs to intricate bed cradles and rigid neck supports, Victorian sleep technology was a mix of earnest medical innovation, peculiar theories, and an unmistakable dash of Victorian eccentricity. Imagine yourself transported back to a dimly lit Victorian parlor or a modest bedroom, where the flicker of a gas lamp casts soft shadows on the walls and the air smells faintly of lavender and burning tallow. There, amidst stacks of medical treatises and herbal concoctions, sits a device unlike anything you might find in your modern bedroom: a sleep chair. This hybrid furniture piece was designed to blur the line between chair and bed, a mechanical attempt to optimize the sleeper's posture and ease the nervous system into a tranquil state conducive to sleep. The concept behind the sleep chair was, at its core, rooted in Victorian medical theories that regarded sleep not simply as a passive rest, but as a physiological process deeply influenced by posture and circulation. Physicians and health reformers of the era posited that lying completely flat might exacerbate nervous disorders, hinder blood flow, and contribute to restless nights or even early death. The solution: recline the body at a slight angle, a pose that supposedly aligned humors and calmed the overactive nerves. The sleep chair, therefore, was built to hold you in this idealized posture, offering an ergonomic promise that sleep could be scientifically engineered. However, unlike the plush recliners or adjustable beds of today, these Victorian sleep chairs were typically constructed from rigid wood frames, their upholstery stiff and unyielding. Far from the inviting cushions and memory foam we associate with relaxation, these chairs were more of an orthopedic experiment than a sanctuary of softness. They often featured angular backs, high armrests, and an inclination angle calculated through trial, error, and medical dogma rather than scientific precision. Visualize yourself settling into one of these devices, your body enveloped by hard wood and coarse fabric, encouraged to stay still and poised as the chair gently cradles your form. Some designs went even further, incorporating straps, belts, or supports intended to prevent you from tossing and turning during the night. These restraints, while well-intentioned, transformed the sleep chair from a soothing device into a confining apparatus. Imagine being buckled in place, your restless limbs tethered as if you were a patient under medical supervision, rather than a sleeper seeking peace. It's no surprise that some users found these contraptions more anxiety-inducing than comforting, the physical restraint mirroring the mental unrest that plagued their nights. Historians and medical scholars continue to debate the efficacy of these devices. Did the sleep chair truly alleviate insomnia by promoting better circulation and calming the nerves? Or did it simply add physical discomfort to an already fraught experience, worsening the condition it sought to cure? The evidence is mixed, though many contemporary accounts hint at a widespread skepticism born from personal experience. Comfort was elusive, and the chair's promise of rest often fell short. If the sleep chair was the Victorian attempt at passive, posture-focused sleep aid, then the sleeping machines represented a more mechanized and experimental frontier. These devices, often powered by steam engines or hand cranks, sought to rock or vibrate the sleeper gently, mimicking the natural motions thought to lull infants to sleep. The Victorian obsession with mechanical innovation extended even to the realm of rest, as inventors designed contraptions that could simulate a soothing cradle's rhythmic motion for adults plagued by insomnia. Imagine the soundscape in a Victorian bedroom equipped with one of these early sleeping machines. The low hum and clatter of gears turning, pistons pumping, or weighted levers rocking the frame. For modern sensibilities, such mechanical noise might be more disruptive than calming. Yet, in an era with few options beyond herbal tinctures, sedatives, or simply enduring the night, any mechanical promise of sleep was met with hope. Advertisements for these devices often extolled their ability to quiet the restless mind and usher the weary soul into peaceful slumber. Leveraging the era's faith in industrial progress, the physical experience of lying on a vibrating or rocking bed must have been strange indeed. The gentle oscillations intended to soothe might just as easily jolt sleepers awake, especially if the machinery malfunctioned or was improperly adjusted. Yet these inventions represent a fascinating intersection of Victorian ingenuity and desperation, a willingness to embrace technology as a solution to deeply human problems. Perhaps the most curious Victorian invention related to sleep was the bed cradle, designed with a more straightforward purpose. The bed cradle was a metal or wooden frame placed over the sleeper's body to hold heavy blankets and quilts off the skin. In drafty Victorian homes where nights could be bitterly cold, the weight and thickness of bedding were essential to warmth. But they came with a risk. Heavy blankets could restrict movement, cause overheating, or even provoke feelings of suffocation or claustrophobia, especially in nervous or ill individuals. The bed cradle, then, was intended to create a protective dome over the sleeper, lifting the weight of blankets just enough to allow air circulation around the body. This was thought to prevent night sweats, a feared symptom of nervous disorders and chronic illness. The bed cradle could be adjusted in size and height to suit the user, and it often featured a simple yet imposing skeletal design that looked like a miniature cage. While its function was practical, the bed cradle's presence could hardly be described as comforting. To lie beneath one's blankets, encased within a metal frame, was an experience not unlike being under a skeleton's grasp. The cool metal bars, often cold to the touch in unheated rooms, might send a shiver down the spine even before sleep claimed the mind. This stark combination of comfort and discomfort typifies many Victorian sleep aids, pragmatic yet tinged with unease. Devices targeting the head and neck illustrate another facet of Victorian sleep peculiarities. Neck collars, or cradles, designed to keep the head perfectly aligned, were marketed as means to prevent nerve strain and maintain proper posture during sleep. Some health manuals recommended wearing tight headbands or bandages wrapped around the forehead, intended to steady the nerves and reduce mental agitation. Such contraptions often had the opposite effect, causing discomfort and even pain. Imagine falling asleep with a rigid collar encircling your neck or a tight band constricting your forehead. Conditions more likely to provoke tension, headaches, and anxiety than relaxation. Yet, for the Victorians, these devices reflected their intense belief in bodily order and the idea that physical alignment could influence mental calm. It was Victorian ergonomics taken to an extreme, merging anatomical theory with sometimes harsh practical application. These inventions and devices embody much more than mere medical curiosity. They reveal Victorian society's profound faith in science and technology as remedies for personal affliction. The 19th century was a period of rapid scientific advancement and industrial progress, and this optimism extended into the intimate realm of sleep, where medicine had often relied on superstition and herbal lore. Victorians embraced mechanical contraptions and scientific theories as keys to unlocking better rest. Yet, this embrace was not without its contradictions. Some devices were grounded in emerging anatomical knowledge, an awareness of circulation, nervous system function, and posture, while others veered into gimmickry, blending sincere hope with marketing hype and a healthy dose of Victorian showmanship. The line between medical innovation and charlatanism was often blurred, reflecting a culture eager to experiment but still grappling with the mysteries of sleep. As you sink into your modern mattress tonight, enveloped by soft linens and unencumbered by belts or metal frames, take a moment to consider those stiff, strapped sharp chairs and clunky mechanical aids of the Victorian era. Though they may not have delivered the restful nights they promised, they were an essential part of a larger story, a story of human perseverance, scientific curiosity, and the desperate search for sleep. The legacy of these Victorian contraptions lives on in our modern sleep technology. Adjustable beds, ergonomic pillows, white noise machines, each a descendant of those early attempts to engineer the perfect night's rest. They remind us that the quest for peaceful sleep is as old as civilization itself, shaped by culture, technology, and the ever-changing understanding of the human body. In the end, Victorian sleep devices were not just curiosities, they were monuments to a time when the boundaries between science, superstition, and daily life were porous and fluid. They show us how deeply sleep is woven into the fabric of human experience, how our dreams and rest are influenced by everything from medical theory to social status to mechanical invention. So tonight, as you lay your head down and drift towards sleep, remember the Victorian sleepers who, like you, wrestled with the elusive comfort of rest, caught between hope and discomfort. Science and superstition, cradle and cage, their struggles remind us that while technology and knowledge may advance, the basic human desire for peaceful sleep remains a timeless, universal quest. As you settle further into the deepening folds of the Victorian night, your thoughts may drift naturally to the rituals that prepared one for rest. And among the most intimate of these was the act of sipping a bedtime beverage. Unlike the modern simplicity of chamomile tea or warm milk, the Victorian approach to nightcaps and soothing drinks was a curious, sometimes bewildering blend of comfort, tradition, superstition, and medical experimentation. These beverages carried promises of pacifying frazzled nerves, easing digestive troubles, and coaxing the weary body and mind into the elusive embrace of sleep. Yet, their effects were as varied and unpredictable as the insomnia plaguing that restless age itself. The humble warm milk was a venerable staple in Victorian households, much as it remains today, often heated gently. It was served with a soothing sweetness added in the form of honey or treacle, a rich, dark syrup made from refined sugar that lent the drink a sticky comfort. The Victorians attributed special qualities to milk's creamy texture and gentle warmth, believing it had a calming influence on the digestive system, which was frequently held responsible for sleeplessness and nervous agitation. The physiological and spiritual importance of digestion in Victorian medical theory cannot be overstated. A poorly functioning stomach was thought to upset the delicate balance of humors and nerves, setting the stage for restlessness. Thus, warm milk became more than a mere drink. It was a ritualistic gesture toward restoring bodily harmony. Some households elevated their warm milk by infusing it with spices, such as nutmeg or cinnamon, both highly prized in Victorian England for their medicinal and aromatic properties. Nutmeg's sweet, warm earthiness was thought to stimulate blood circulation and soothe the nerves, while cinnamon, with its sharp and spicy character, was believed to bring gentle warmth to the body's core. Together, these spices transformed a simple beverage into a potent potion designed to lull the senses and quiet the mind. The scent alone, rich, spicy, and comforting, would fill the night air, working alongside the milk's heat to coax the body toward relaxation. Yet, warm milk was merely the beginning of a far more diverse repertoire of Victorian bedtime beverages. Herbal infusions held a place of honor in the Victorian pharmacopoeia, drawing upon centuries of botanical knowledge and folklore. Valerian root, hops, chamomile, and countless other herbs were brewed in varying strengths and combinations. Their efficacy debated, but their popularity undeniable. Valerian root, in particular, was one of the more infamous herbal remedies of the time, known for its powerful sedative qualities. Valerian was often prescribed to soothe nervous disorders, reduce anxiety, and promote sleep. However, its reputation for a strong, earthy, and somewhat unpleasant odor meant that drinking valerian tea was not a delicate affair. It was often accompanied by grimaces from the drinker. Yet its effectiveness was taken seriously enough to warrant regular use despite its pungency. Victorian herbalists and apothecaries extolled its virtues, offering it as a natural alternative to the heavier chemical sedatives of the day. Hops, the same bitter flower used extensively in beer brewing, found their way into these sleep-promoting brews. The Victorians believed the herb's bitterness was therapeutic, able to calm an overactive mind and ease agitation. When steeped in hot water, hops released subtle earthy and floral notes, which some found pleasantly calming. This natural sedative was often combined with other herbs to create complex blends tailored to individual complaints. Though less potent than valerian, hops enjoyed a reputation for their mild efficacy and agreeable taste. Chamomile was another favorite, known for its gentle floral aroma and soothing properties. Chamomile was a common feature in Victorian sleep remedies. Its use extended beyond mere beverage. Chamomile-filled pillows were tucked beneath heads, and chamomile oil was used in bath waters. The botanical community of the time debated which herbs truly possessed sedative effects versus those whose benefits lay chiefly in pleasant aromas and ritual. Nonetheless, chamomile's gentle reputation made it a beloved staple of Victorian bedtime culture. Moving beyond herbal teas, Victorian nightcaps sometimes took on a decidedly stronger character. Alcoholic beverages were commonly incorporated into bedtime rituals, often laced with sweeteners such as treacle or honey to soften their potent sting. Brandy, whiskey, and fortified wines like sherry or port were frequent choices, consumed not merely for intoxication but for their sedative effects. The warmth from the alcohol would, at least initially, induce drowsiness, quieting the chatter of an anxious mind and relaxing tense muscles. Yet, the very substance that promised sleep often delivered restless nights. While alcohol hastened the onset of sleep, it was notorious for fragmenting sleep cycles, leading to frequent awakenings, lighter sleep, and diminished restorative rest. Despite these well-known effects, many Victorians embraced alcohol as a practical solution to insomnia, often unaware or dismissive of the longer-term drawbacks. Historical records suggest a tacit acceptance of this trade-off. a willingness to endure disrupted sleep in exchange for relief from the agonizing grip of wakefulness. One particularly distinctive Victorian beverage was the milk punch, a warming concoction blending hot milk, spirits, usually brandy or whiskey, sugar, and spices like nutmeg or cinnamon, served in some homes as a luxurious and indulgent nighttime treat. Milk punch was reputed to relax muscles and calm frazzled nerves. The melding of creamy milk and sharp spirits created a complex sensory experience, both comforting and intoxicating. Imagine sipping this rich, fragrant mixture beside a flickering fireplace, the swirling heat in your chest promising a descent into slumber. For those grappling with anxiety or exhaustion, the milk punch represented both solace and a potent escape. Beyond the realm of home remedies, the Victorian market was awash with commercial products, soporific waters, tinctures, and patent medicines touted as miracles of sleep induction. These elixirs, often containing opiates, chloral hydrate, or other chemical sedatives, blurred the line between medicine and narcotic. The lure of such preparations was immense, especially for those suffering from chronic insomnia or nervous disorders. Advertisements in newspapers and pamphlets promised effortless sleep, free from the burdens of worry and restlessness. Yet, these drugs carried serious risks of dependency and overdose. The temptation to self-medicate with these soporific potions was strong, fueled by the relentless nature of Victorian insomnia and the social stigma surrounding mental health and sleep disorders. Many individuals consumed these substances in secret, fearing judgment yet desperate for relief. The widespread use of such drugs has led some historians to argue that the Victorian era may have faced its own hidden opioid crisis, masked by social conventions and medical ignorance. Moreover, the potency of these patent medicines was often unpredictable. Homemade versions of sleep remedies circulated alongside commercial products, varying wildly in strength and safety. The dosing was guesswork at best, and tragic stories abound of accidental overdoses or prolonged dependency resulting from well-intentioned but misguided attempts to conquer sleeplessness. Victorian society's relationship with bedtime beverages was further complicated by an overlay of superstition and moral judgment. Sleep was not merely a physical need, but a reflection of character and discipline. Those who failed to sleep soundly were sometimes viewed as morally weak or constitutionally flawed. The choice and preparation of bedtime drinks, therefore, carried symbolic weight as well. A carefully brewed herbal infusion signaled care, order, and respectability, while reliance on stronger substances hinted at deeper anxieties or failings. In addition to the physiological effects, Victorian bedtime beverages functioned as comforting rituals, moments of calm in otherwise tumultuous lives. The preparation and sipping of these drinks often became a private ceremony, a deliberate winding down from the day's cares. The sensory pleasures of warmth, aroma, and taste combined to create a cocoon of safety and predictability. Even if the scientific basis for their efficacy was shaky, the psychological benefits of these rituals were undeniable. As you consider the rich variety of Victorian bedtime beverages, each a mixture of comfort, tradition, medical theory, and occasional danger, you glimpse a society grappling earnestly with the universal human challenge of sleep. Their experiments ranged from the simple and soothing to the complex and perilous, reflecting both the limitations and creativity of their time. So, the next time you pour yourself a cup of chamomile tea or warm milk before bed, remember those Victorian sleepers who navigated a much murkier landscape of remedies, their nights filled with the scents and flavors of herbal brews, spiced tonics, intoxicating nightcaps, and mysterious patent medicines. Their restless pursuit of rest is a timeless story, a testament to the human desire to find peace in the dark hours and greet the dawn refreshed and renewed. As you settle into your own bed tonight, perhaps in a quiet room warmed by modern heating and softened by layers of comfortable bedding, it's worth pausing to consider a question that might not immediately cross your mind. Who actually got to sleep well in Victorian England? Because sleep, something so fundamental to human health and well-being, was far from evenly distributed. It was a privilege shaped by wealth, social standing, and circumstance. The quality, quantity, and even the possibility of rest were deeply entangled with class. Victorian insomnia and sleep troubles weren't merely the result of personal habits, remedies, or nightly routines. They were also reflections of an unequal society where some people could afford the comfort of rest, while others were condemned to restless nights by the very fabric of their lives. To understand this better, imagine two very different bedrooms. The first belongs to a wealthy family, perhaps in a townhouse on a quiet street, or a country manor with thick walls and plush furnishings. This chamber is spacious and warm, furnished with feather beds piled high beneath heavy silk and velvet curtains. A fire crackles in a grate, attended by a discreet servant who manages the hearth, adjusting the heat to ensure a perfect sleeping temperature. The room is insulated against noise and draft, a sanctuary from the hustle and clamor of city life or rural chores. Candles flicker softly, gas lamps dim to create a soothing ambiance. Medicine chests hold aromatic herbs, laudanum, or tinctures carefully measured by a household nurse or doctor. This environment, carefully curated, creates a setting that encourages deep and uninterrupted sleep. Now, contrast this with a cramped, drafty garret room somewhere deep within the overcrowded slums of London, Manchester, or Liverpool. Here, a single room might house an entire family, parents, children, perhaps even elderly relatives, jostling for space on a hard, lumpy mattress or a shared pallet on the floor. The room is thin-walled, exposed to the noise of rowdy neighbors, barking dogs, the clatter of street vendors, and the ever-present rumble of factory machinery. Heat comes, if at all, from a small grate or shared stove, and cold creeps through gaps in the window panes. The bedding is threadbare, linens are reused and rarely washed. Air circulation is poor, and the smell of damp, sweat, and coal smoke hangs heavy. Medical care is scarce and expensive remedies out of reach. The poor often relied on home remedies passed down through generations or on cheap, sometimes dangerous patent medicines bought at the local apothecary. The conditions are harsh and unforgiving. Illness, hunger, and exhaustion are constant companions in such an environment. The very act of falling asleep can feel like a luxury. This stark division between the sleeping experiences of the rich and the poor was no accident. It was a direct consequence of Victorian society's rigid class structure and the economic realities of the Industrial Revolution, which brought with it both unprecedented wealth and grinding poverty. For the upper classes, sleep was intertwined with social status and identity. A fine bed was a symbol of refinement, a statement of wealth and taste. Feather mattresses, costly linens, and thick curtains were not merely for comfort. They were declarations of one's place in the social hierarchy. The presence of a dedicated chamber, separate from noisy communal spaces, allowed for privacy and peace, essentials for restful sleep. Servants ensured that heating, lighting, and noise were managed with care, while doctors and nurses attended to the sick or anxious with the latest remedies. But even among these privileged circles, sleep was not always guaranteed. The pressures of maintaining social standing, managing estates, engaging in political and cultural affairs, and adhering to strict codes of behavior often led to anxiety and insomnia. The mental burden of reputation and productivity could weigh heavily. And many wealthy Victorians struggled with sleeplessness, born from worry and expectation. Their insomnia was not born of cold beds or noise, but of the relentless demands of status and the fear of failure. Even the best mattress and plushest surroundings could not always soften such intangible anxieties. Meanwhile, the working classes and the poor faced challenges on an entirely different scale. The very structure of their lives made restorative sleep difficult, if not impossible. Overcrowded housing meant sharing cramped rooms or beds with multiple family members or even lodgers. Privacy was a rarity, and quietness even more so. The cold, damp air that permeated slum homes made for restless nights and frequent illness. In many cases, children and adults alike were forced to sleep in shifts or with little hope of continuous rest. Poor sanitation and close quarters facilitated the spread of disease, further disturbing sleep cycles. Industrialization exacerbated these conditions. The relentless schedules of factory work, often involving 10 to 12-hour shifts, irregular hours, and night work, disrupted natural circadian rhythms. Workers might return home exhausted, but still unable to find rest in a noisy, cramped room. Noise from factories, street traffic, and neighbors often intruded upon the night, while poor lighting and lack of ventilation compounded discomfort. The physical toll of labor and the psychological stress of poverty created a feedback loop that left many exhausted but unable to achieve deep, refreshing sleep. Yet sleep among the poor was not solely a matter of physical conditions. It was steeped in social and cultural meanings. Rest was necessary for the next day's labor. So failing to sleep soundly was sometimes interpreted as laziness or unreliability. This stigma added another layer of pressure and guilt for those already struggling. Sleeplessness was not just a private affliction, but a social burden, tied to survival in a harsh economic environment. The Victorian moral framework often judged poor sleepers harshly, viewing them through the lens of character and virtue, or the lack thereof. This judgment complicated how insomnia was perceived and addressed across classes, reinforcing divisions and misunderstandings. Despite the bleakness, the working classes developed communal strategies to cope with sleep difficulties. One of the more intriguing social phenomena was the existence of sleeping clubs, or informal gatherings where people shared remedies, tips, and experiences. These clubs offered a form of solidarity and mutual support, spaces where the struggles of insomnia could be openly discussed and addressed collectively. Though not widespread, these gatherings reveal a communal dimension to Victorian sleep culture, where knowledge and comfort were exchanged beyond the realm of doctors and apothecaries. Such clubs might meet in taverns or community halls, discussing the merits of herbal teas, the best ways to prepare beds, or even superstitions about avoiding nightmares. They represent a vital counterpoint to the isolation often associated with sleep problems. Historians continue to debate the extent to which social class determined actual sleep quality versus perceptions of sleep and health. After all, the wealthy, despite their comfort, often endured mental stresses that disrupted rest, while the poor lived with harsher physical conditions, but sometimes a less complicated mental landscape. Some argue that stress, anxiety, and lifestyle mattered more than material comfort, while others emphasize the undeniable role of environment and resources. The truth likely lies in a complex interplay of factors, differing widely between individuals and communities. As you prepare to rest tonight, perhaps enveloped in the comforts afforded by modern heating, soundproofing, and plush bedding. Take a moment to appreciate the complex history of Victorian sleep, and to remember that your experience of comfort and quiet might be luxuries shaped by centuries of social inequality and cultural change. The struggles of Victorian insomnia were never merely medical puzzles. They were reflections of the social fabric, revealing the stark divides and struggles of an era grappling with industrial modernity and deep class distinctions. Sleep, in Victorian England, was a mirror held up to society itself, reflecting the hopes, hardships, and inequalities that shaped every household. And as you close your eyes tonight, you are joining a long line of sleepers, privileged and poor, each navigating the dark, restless frontier of night in their own way, each seeking the peace that so many in that era could only dream of. As you drift ever closer to sleep tonight, let your mind wander back into the intricate and often troubling cultural landscape of Victorian sleeplessness, a world where insomnia was never simply a physical ailment or a medical problem, but something far more complex, a moral battleground. In the labyrinthine social fabric of Victorian England, sleep, or more often, the failure to sleep well, was imbued with meanings that extended far beyond the realms of health and science. It became a symbol, a marker of character, a measure of one's worth and virtue. To be sleepless was to be suspect, to be judged, and to be caught in a web of social anxieties that could worsen the very condition it sought to explain. Insomnia, in Victorian thought, was tightly wound with the notions of industriousness, moral rectitude, and social responsibility. Laziness was considered the cardinal sin of the age, the ultimate failing in a society obsessed with progress, discipline, and productivity. To sleep poorly, then, was not just to endure a private torment, but to risk public shame. It implied a failure to live up to the era's rigorous demands, a dereliction of duty to oneself, one's family, one's employer, and indeed, society itself. The Victorian moral imagination was unforgiving. If you could not sleep, perhaps you were simply wasting time, shirking the labor and discipline that your station required. Worse still, insomnia could be seen as a symptom of a corrupt or weak soul, a sign that your inner resolve had faltered. This cultural framing of sleep as a moral issue was not a benign or peripheral aspect of Victorian life. It shaped the way individuals perceived their own experiences, the ways families and communities responded to sufferers, and the kinds of remedies that were prescribed or condemned. Sleeplessness was less about rest and renewal than about proving one's worthiness and self-control in a fast-changing world that demanded tireless energy and unflagging dedication. The Industrial Revolution's immense social upheavals heightened these pressures. The rise of factories, mechanized labor, and urbanization had redefined daily rhythms, erasing traditional boundaries between work, and rest. Time itself became a commodity, and the clockwork precision demanded by factory schedules imposed a relentless structure on people's lives. Productivity was no longer a private concern. It was a public expectation. To sleep was to prepare for work. To fail to sleep was to fail the machine of progress. The moral discourse of the era insisted that every waking moment be harnessed toward improvement and advancement, leaving little room for indulgence in idleness, fatigue, or mental wandering. Within this context, insomnia became a paradoxical condition. On the one hand, failing to sleep was to be condemned. On the other, worrying excessively about sleep was to fall victim to nervousness or weakness. The more anxious an individual grew about their sleeplessness, the more difficult it became to find rest, ensnaring them in a vicious cycle of self-recrimination and exhaustion. Doctors and moralists alike warned against excessive concern about rest, yet simultaneously urged the importance of maintaining discipline over one's body and mind. This contradictory messaging added layers of confusion and guilt to the already fraught experience of insomnia. Gender roles played a crucial part in how Victorian society interpreted and responded to sleeplessness. Women, in particular, bore the brunt of medical and social judgments steeped in sexism and misunderstanding. The condition known as hysteria, a catch-all diagnosis applied disproportionately to women, framed many cases of female insomnia as manifestations of emotional excess, nervous fragility, or moral failings. The Victorian medical establishment viewed women's sleeplessness as symptomatic of their supposedly delicate constitutions, their heightened sensitivity, and their inherent irrationality. Emotional disturbances were pathologized, and sleepless nights were often dismissed as evidence of feminine weakness rather than taken as genuine suffering. This perception had profound consequences. Women were encouraged, or pressured, to endure sleeplessness silently, or to accept patronizing treatments that reinforced stereotypes of vulnerability and dependency. Their insomnia was often not seen as a problem to be treated on its own terms, but as a sign that they needed to conform better to prescribed norms of feminine behavior, rest, and emotional restraint. Bedtime rituals for women were laden with symbolism and expectations, and failure to find sleep could be read as a failure to maintain the proper decorum of the Victorian lady. Men, by contrast, were expected to mask their fatigue and soldier on despite sleepless nights. The Victorian ideal of masculinity prized stoicism, endurance, and unyielding strength. To admit to weakness, nervousness, or insomnia was to risk undermining one's role as provider, protector, and social pillar. Male insomnia was often hidden behind a veneer of toughness. Many men suffered in silence rather than seek help or acknowledge vulnerability. The societal imperative to appear unshakable made it difficult for men to confront the realities of their sleeplessness or receive sympathetic treatment. This gendered double-bind created a silent epidemic of suffering, with women's sleeplessness trivialized or medicalized, and men's ignored or concealed. Both were caught in a social trap that equated sleeplessness not just with health, but with moral character, productivity, and worthiness. A fascinating, if peculiar, Victorian notion was the suspicion that too much sleep could also be a sign of moral laxity or laziness. Rest was essential, but only in measured amounts. The ideal Victorian sleeper was one who could balance efficiency with renewal, who neither wasted time in idleness nor pushed the body beyond endurance. Oversleeping was sometimes interpreted as evidence of a weak constitution or a lack of discipline, a failure to meet the demands of life's relentless pace. In this sense, sleep was regulated not only by medical advice, but by social norms and expectations, with people policing themselves and others to maintain this delicate balance. Sleep was no longer simply a natural biological function. It had become a moral performance. This cultural preoccupation with sleep as a signifier of character extended deeply into the Victorian medical discourse. Doctors, health reformers, and moralists often blended physiological observations with moral judgments. Insomnia was framed as a symptom of nervousness or moral weakness, terms that fused medical language with ethical condemnation. Sleeplessness became evidence of a fragile nervous system, an unstable mind, or a flawed character. This conflation meant that sufferers were sometimes viewed with suspicion or pity rather than empathy. The language of nerves and hysteria served to medicalize social anxieties and reinforce prevailing hierarchies of power and gender. This moral framing had real consequences for treatment and patient experience. While some individuals sought help and found relief, many others were driven underground by shame and guilt. The stigma around sleeplessness discouraged open discussion and honest medical inquiry. Patients might downplay their symptoms or avoid seeking care for fear of being labeled lazy, weak, or hysterical. The moral panic surrounding insomnia thus compounded the suffering, creating barriers to understanding and support. Historians still debate the precise impact of this moral panic on Victorian society. Did it encourage people to seek remedies and improve their habits? Or did it silence them and exacerbate distress? The answer is likely complex and varied, in some cases. The pressure to conform to ideals of industriousness and control may have motivated behavioral changes and fostered new health practices. In others, it may have deepened alienation and internalized self-criticism. Even today, echoes of this Victorian moral framework linger in contemporary attitudes towards sleep. The cultural tendency to shame oneself or others for not sleeping well enough or for wasting time in bed is a modern manifestation of age-old anxieties about productivity, worth, and control. The struggle to balance rest and activity remains fraught with social meanings that extend beyond biology. As you float closer to sleep tonight, take a moment to consider how these historical judgments might still influence your own experience of rest and wakefulness. Victorian insomnia was never merely a medical or physiological condition. It was a tangled knot of nerves, social expectations, and moral codes. It reminds us that sleep is never just about biology, but also about how we see ourselves and how society sees us. The night's quiet might feel personal and intimate, but it is also shaped by centuries of cultural stories about worth, work, and the elusive quest for peace. As dawn begins to cast its pale light upon the world, drawing the curtains on our deep exploration of Victorian sleep and sleeplessness, it's fitting to pause and reflect on what vestiges of that era's insomnia cures and rituals have endured, and which thankfully faded away, vanishing like the early morning mist that signals the end of a long, restless night. The Victorian period, steeped in rapid scientific progress, cultural upheaval, and often bewildering medical experimentation, left behind a curious and complex legacy in the realm of sleep. Some of its ideas, treatments, and anxieties persist, albeit wrapped in modern scientific garb, while others have become the stuff of historical footnotes, strange artifacts best left to dusty museum displays rather than bedroom nightstands. At the heart of this legacy lies the curious world of Victorian patent medicines and their modern descendants. During the 19th century, the patent medicine industry flourished like never before. These were the miracle cures of their time, sold with grand promises and often dubious ingredients. Bottles filled with mysterious syrups, tinctures, and powders claimed to banish sleeplessness, soothe nerves, and induce peaceful slumber. Many contained herbal extracts, valerian, hops, lavender, and some included mild sedatives and narcotics like opium or chloral hydrate, substances that would, with time, come to be understood as dangerously addictive or harmful. The marketing techniques used then, appealing to desperation, promising quick and effortless relief, are eerily familiar to the strategies employed by many modern pharmaceutical companies. Today's sleep aids often combine herbal supplements and synthetic compounds, boasting efficacy and safety verified by rigorous clinical trials. But the underlying cultural appetite remains unchanged, a yearning for an easy escape from the torment of insomnia. The specter of opium looms large in this narrative, casting a shadow that stretches from Victorian parlors to today's medical and societal struggles. Opium's role as a sleep aid was widespread and culturally normalized in the 19th century. Often administered in the form of laudanum, a tincture that combined opium and alcohol. It was the panacea for many ailments, including sleeplessness, anxiety, and chronic pain. While this narcotic promised relief, it also sowed the seeds for what some historians now call the first opioid crisis. The addictive nature of opium and its derivatives was poorly understood, and many found themselves trapped in cycles of dependency. This cautionary tale from the Victorian past resonates loudly today. As contemporary medicine grapples with the benefits and risks of prescription opioids, the challenges of addiction, and the quest for safer, more effective sleep aids, the Victorian experience reminds us that remedies can carry double edges, offering solace but also potential peril. Yet, not all Victorian legacies are tinged with such darkness. Many of their bedtime rituals, surprisingly, have endured and even shaped modern sleep hygiene practices. Consider the warm bath, an evening soak steeped in tradition, believed to relax muscles, calm nerves, and ease the transition into sleep. Today's sleep experts still recommend a warm bath before bed, recognizing its physiological benefits in lowering the body's core temperature and signaling readiness for rest. Similarly, the Victorian use of calming scents, lavender, chamomile, and rosemary, has found a robust foothold in contemporary aromatherapy. These fragrant herbs, thought to ease anxiety and encourage sleep, are now backed by scientific research showing mild sedative effects and stress reduction. The Victorian obsession with darkness manifest in the widespread use of heavy blackout curtains to block gaslight and moonlight alike. Prefigured modern advice to reduce blue light exposure and create a dark sleep environment to facilitate melatonin production and circadian rhythm regulation. However, not all Victorian inventions earned a place in our modern bedrooms. The era was rife with mechanical contraptions and devices that aimed to conquer sleeplessness, but often failed to deliver comfort. Take the sleeping chairs designed to position the sleeper at a specific angle thought to improve circulation and calm the nerves. Constructed from rigid wood and often equipped with straps to keep the occupant immobile. These chairs were less recliners and more instruments of constraint, sometimes provoking anxiety rather than relief. Likewise, bed cradles were metal frames placed over the sleeper to hold heavy blankets away, intended to prevent overheating and suffocation. The concept had merit in drafty Victorian rooms, but the cold metal and imposing structure could hardly be considered cozy. And then there were the headbands and neck collars meant to stabilize posture and reduce nerve strain. Uncomfortable accessories more likely to aggravate tension than soothe it. These relics of Victorian sleep technology reflect an era eager to apply science and invention to personal health, though often with clumsy or misguided results. Underlying all these remedies and rituals was a pervasive moral panic about sleep and its relationship to industriousness and virtue, a legacy that, though softened, continues to echo in today's productivity culture. The Victorians lived in a world where rest, it was not just a biological necessity, but a social responsibility. Sleep was measured against the yardstick of usefulness and self-discipline. Laziness was the moral failing to be avoided, and insomnia was often interpreted as a personal flaw or failure to conform to societal expectations. These ideas persist subtly in modern conversations about sleep deprivation, where people sometimes blame themselves for not optimizing their rest or criticize others for perceived idleness. The Victorian sleep ethic reminds us that our relationship with rest is never purely individual, but always intertwined with cultural narratives about worth and achievement. Interestingly, the Victorian fascination with mesmerism and hypnotism, a blend of earnest science and theatrical showmanship, planted seeds that would eventually blossom into modern sleep psychology and cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, CBTI. While Victorians waved pendulums and spoke soothing words, today's clinicians use evidence-based techniques grounded in neuroscience to treat sleep disorders. The core insight remains. Sleep is deeply connected to mental states and can be influenced by thought patterns, anxieties, and learned behaviors. Victorian mesmerists, despite their eccentricities, were early explorers into the mind's role in rest, paving the way for more humane and effective treatments. As you prepare to slip fully into your own restful night, consider the rich, tangled history behind your sleep. From opium tinctures and patent medicines to lavender sachets and blackout curtains, Victorian insomnia cures were a patchwork of hope, fear, superstition, and experimentation. They reveal a society wrestling to understand and master one of life's most essential mysteries. And as you breathe deeply and surrender to sleep's embrace, take comfort in the fact that you are part of a long, winding story, a journey that has brought humanity from the dark gaslit rooms and dubious remedies of the past to the peaceful, scientifically informed nights of today. Sleep well, knowing that every restful breath you take connects you to centuries of dreamers, seekers, and healers who dared to hope that a good night's sleep was not just a dream, but a possibility.